Welcome back out on the mushroom trail. It's an absolutely beautiful September day out here in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, and the fall mushroom season is just around the corner. Let's jump into this forest. Let's see what we see. The other day, I brought a good buddy of mine out into this exact forest, along with his 5-year-old daughter, and I would park them in front of these white chanterelles and have them scour the ground in search of them. That particular day, there weren't any as clear as this one. Look at this. This one, in stark contrast to the surrounding salal leaves. They're not always as obvious or as prominent as this, so as several of you who've been watching the videos know, a lot of times these white chanterelles will barely break through the surface, just revealing the tiniest little bit of their white cap. This one really kind of revealing the bulk of its cap. I would identify this as a flag, one that would make us pause and look more closely. You'll notice that it has these decurrent ridges, just like a Pacific golden chanterelle, running clear down the stipe. These ones fairly developed, looking pretty. And of course, this one, our flag, we know that there's more around. It's just a matter of whether or not we can find them. Let's take a look. And here's the one we just pulled. And as I alluded to, when we get lucky enough to get a flag like that, we know there's more around. And it just took a second of looking, but check it out right back there. This one also fairly prominent, not hiding. Let's grab it. And this one, just a tiny little guy. Oftentimes I may leave this, but for the sake of education, we'll give it a tug. Take a look. Beautiful little white chanterelle. And hiding under the leaves and the mosses, let's take a look. Yeah, I suspect that this one is going to be quite a bit bigger than the one that we just previously pulled up a second ago. Look at that cap. It looks like it's got a little bit of rose comb mutation going on. Yeah, look at that. Again, nicely developed decurrent ridges running down the stipe. This is a prime white chanterelle. And again, this is going to have a little bit of a firmer flesh than the Pacific Goldens that we all know so well. In a lot of ways, I oftentimes prefer this way. And right here, we've got a nice display of lichens hanging off a branch, and lo and behold, right under that, we've got a chanterelle. Boy, it looks like this one may have seen better days. It's probably been out here for quite some time. Looks fairly beat up. Still good enough, though. We'll bring it home, still make a good meal. And just back there underneath the cedars, we've got a relatively obvious one that I see off in the distance, popping up through the duff. Again, as I've mentioned in videos past, a lot of times I'll look under these cedars, not necessarily because they have a mycorrhizal association with them, but because both the cedars and the white chanterelle prefer this loamy, acidic soil. Look what we have here. So we've got the Douglas fir cone, which that's the tree that this one associates with on an ectomycorrhizal basis. But look, we're using these cedars as an indicator for the proper habitat. And boy, this looks like a cluster. I can feel that there's more than one down here. Let me peel this back a little bit just to get a better sense. Give this a tug. Oh, pretty dry. That one snapped right off. Somewhat larger one here. None of these are particularly huge, but we've got the smaller one that kind of broke free, a slightly larger one, and I think that there's a third that remains. I may actually leave that one to see what it does. And boy, I tell you, this just never gets old for me. The thrill of spotting these. Take a look at that. Look at how subtle that is. I feel like our brains are really wired for the intermittent rewards that come with foraging and mushroom hunting, seeking out these white chanterelles in particular. There's something about it, the successes mixed with plenty of failures. I always wonder, how many did I not see today? How many did I nearly step on or actually step on? My guess is more than one. And I just crawled up underneath these cedars to snag this one that I pointed out a second ago that was kind of prominently displayed pushing up the duff. Looks like this one's possibly been out a little while as well. Look at that. Beautiful. And check this out. So I just pulled that one underneath the cedars, and I get out to clean it off, and I look down, and look at what I'm spotting down here. None other than the Pacific golden chanterelle, Cantharellus formosus, literally a couple feet away. We're going to leave this one and let it grow out a little bit more, but cool to see these so close. Take a look at this. So we've got what appears to be a big leaf maple log. So we've got a fallen tree that's been here for some time. We can see the decay process has certainly begun. And if we look closely, we notice these bright orange splotches in these little cavities and pockets on this log. This is what's known as Orangepore Crust, Ceriporia spissa. And notice we've got this brilliant bright orange small pored crust fungus, a little lighter at the margins. If we pan down here, let's see if we can get a slightly better view. You're going to see this on hardwoods primarily. I'm told that at times it can show up on conifers, but it's not something that you see very often. Right down here we've got a little midden from a Douglas squirrel, so we've got all these Douglas fir cones. Look at how that Orangepore crust is just growing right in amongst those cones. So that lighter margin is going to be sort of a soft mycelium that this is spreading or growing from. Look at how vibrant and colorful this is. Super cool to see. And again, primarily we're going to see this on hardwoods out here in the Pacific Northwest. And I just hopped over this log to investigate the other side and take a look. We've got massive patches. Now notice how this is flush with the actual wood. It's flat against it. So it's not like we've got a traditional mushroom-shaped fruiting body. When, a crust fungus is like this, flat against the surface of wood. The fancy mycological term that we use to describe that, we say that it's resupinate. And so this is going to grow in and amongst these kind of undersides. Sometimes if you roll a log over, you might see these crust fungi on the underside. I think that has to do primarily with moisture. But this is a white rot fungus, so it's going to attack the lignin and break that down with these oxidative enzymes. Really interesting to see. And again, this has fine pores too, that I'm not sure if you could see these in this. I may add some images if I think or remember to do so. I'll try to capture that on film. And just up here, all along the trail, take a look at this. So I'm noticing all these cedar fronds, along with small little cedar cones, just littering the trail this time of year. So late summer, early fall, this is a really common sight out here in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. And I suspect that the culprit is our Douglas squirrel, also known as the chicory. This is our small native red squirrel that's likely going to work up in the treetops up here in these Western Redcedars, dropping these fronds so that it can access the nutrients that are in these cones. This can be an important food source. And take a look at this little cedar frond that's been placed up here on the log. I suppose it's possible that it just dropped right here, but as I look around, I'm seeing signs of feeding. So I can see little scales and cones that look to have been nibbled on by a Douglas squirrel. And sometimes they'll do just that. They'll find a perch and go to work on these cones. And I just got into a patch. Look at this. This is even more thick with these cedar fronds. And if we fix our gaze up here on this log, check this out. This is kind of interesting. So see how we've got all these small little scales? These are the scales of the Western Redcedar cone. And even though they're really small, we can see that some kind of little critter or creature, again, I suspect the Douglas squirrel, has been feeding on these. And a lot of times when these pile up in abundance, we'll refer to this as a midden, or a little feeding area where the leftover scales kind of build up. And, you know, even though they're really, really tiny, you know, you can just imagine the size of the actual seeds that they're after. There's a Douglas fir scale, the bigger brown scale. That's what I tend to associate with the Douglas squirrel more than anything else. But these Western Redcedar cones are especially interesting. And you know, these can be a great source of fat, which is an important fuel, you know, especially as these little rodents are gearing up for the winter. They really want to have those energy stores or supplies built up. So aside from fat, you know, it's also just a good source of carbs and proteins and micronutrients too, you know, things like calcium and potassium and magnesium, things like that, as well as, I suppose, B vitamins. So, you know, there's a lot of valuable nutrition stored in that. And so oftentimes these squirrels, you know, and I suppose this could also be a different squirrel. I'm assuming it's the Douglas squirrel. That's what I associate mostly with this, but it could be other little rodents or creatures, I suppose, too. But, you know, what they'll oftentimes do, the Douglas squirrel in particular, is they'll get up into the treetop, into the canopy, and they'll just go to work en masse, and they'll just drop down just bunches and bunches of these. And once they've dropped down to the forest floor, they'll actually store these. I'm trying to dig away at this little cedar cone to see if we can get a look at these minuscule little seeds. Maybe you can see them in there. I don't know if I'm doing a great job or not. But again, just a fascinating little sign out here in the forest this time of year. Keep your eyes peeled for those cedar fronds and the work of the Douglas squirrel. And just up the trail here, check this out. Little tiny flash of color caught my eye back here behind these plants and tucked under the needles and the mosses. None other than the Pacific golden chanterelle, Cantharellus formosus. I know a lot of you are out in search of this, and boy, I've been finding them intermittently. I'm going to throw a little salal leaf over this one. I was finding quite a few of these after a little burst of rain that we got several weeks back. And boy, I have a feeling that once we get a significant dose of true fall kind of soaking rains, this forest, I feel like, is just going to be bursting at the seams. I feel like this is going to be potentially another record year to rival last year in terms of chanterelle performance. Check this out. Look at that. Oh, it looks like more than one. A little cluster. I just figured I'd pan over this area after seeing that one tiny little splash of color. And lo and behold, look at what we've got. Let's go ahead and peel some of these back. Take a closer look. Yeah, look at that. So, you know, several weeks back I alluded, or actually I'm not even sure that I posted the footage. If I think of it, maybe I'll throw in some of the older footage at the end of this video, but these are clearly shifting gears into what I would categorize as fall chanterelles. Notice how the cap, there's a little bit more to it, right? So we've got some developed ridges underneath the cap. This one, actually, I thought it was a couple, but it just split. So maybe this was out a while and started to dry out. A lot of times we refer to the way these split as being similar to string cheese. So anyways, you can see that this kind of convoluted margin or kind of wavy edge to the cap is very characteristic of a classic fall chanterelle, at least for these Pacific Goldens, whereas those summer ones tended to be a little more stout and robust. I'm just looking a little more carefully just to make sure that there's none that I'm missing out here. Boy, what a beautiful color, huh? And just look at this beautiful kind of egg yolk yellow. We've got those beautiful ridges developing underneath the cap. Boy, I'll tell you what too, as I sniff these really have a strong, distinct, fruity, kind of apricot aroma to them. The white chanterelles also have that, but I feel like these are more pronounced with the Pacific Goldens. And all throughout the forest today, I've been encountering a ton of these downy little feathers of the great horned owl. Now for the great horned owl, this is actually the peak molting season, where they're actually shedding their old feathers to grow new ones. So keep an eye out for these if you're out in the forest. And these Pacific golden chanterelles, I tell you, they're really starting to show up in force. To date, I've definitely been consuming a lot more white chanterelles than Pacific goldens, but I tell you, each day that I'm out in the forest, I tend to come back with at least a handful of Pacific goldens. And you know, the growth is really transforming from that summer morphology to the fall chanterelles. This one is somewhere in between. We can see that margin is pretty wavy. It looks like it was just getting started, but I'm sure lots of its friends will fill in and take its place. And take a look at this, just up here. Do you see this big old bulge coming out of the mossy forest floor? Again, this is a classic shrump, and you can see that little gill structure underneath. So this is a Russula. I suspect that this is likely the Blackening Russula, Russula nigricans. You know, we featured this one in a video that I put out last fall, and in that particular one, I think I'm going to leave that duff on top. It doesn't really want to budge there. But on that one, we featured the piggybacks, or the powder cap that actually grows on this mushroom. That was Astrophora lycoperdoides. So maybe I'll have to check back a little later and see if there's mushrooms growing on this mushroom in a couple weeks. And I tell you, I'm back at this little mossy knoll. Now this is a spot that I've been foraging from literally for the last, I don't know, couple months. I've pulled so many white chanterelles out of this one singular spot. I must have looked at it at least a dozen times. And each time that I return, check this out. So here's another one. So they just keep coming here. And you know, a lot of the times, you know, you might just get this small little incremental growth. Let me give this a tug. Yeah, take a look at this. So this one's super well developed. Look at this. You can tell that it's kind of been held down by the duff. We've got super developed kind of ridge or gill-like structure there underneath. This is not a young mushroom. We see some yellowing from age and just drying out. Again, this is our white chanterelle, Cantharellus subalbidus. And you know, I just would continue to reiterate that if you find one of these mushrooms in any given spot, don't be afraid to kind of pause, slow down, take a closer look, or even return back to it in the days ahead, because chances are that there's more than one. And boy, it's already been just an incredible mushroom season out here. And I'll tell you, these recent days, every day I'm in the forest, I just get this sense that it's almost, you know, like a coiled spring out here, that given a good soak, a good solid plentiful rain, I feel like the forest is just about to explode with fungal growth. So I have a feeling that we've got a good mushroom season ahead of us here in the fall season. And you know, it dawned on me that things have been a little busy of late, so I didn't get a chance to put up some of the footage that I had from a few weeks back, but there was one particular little section right after a rain that got me super excited for what's to come. So I may just pull a few clips from the past few weeks and place them in here. And just up here on the trail, I just wanted to highlight something that really jumped out at me. Take a look at this. What do you make of this? Notice we've got a little fungal growth here popping out of the forest floor. Now, in our enthusiasm to track down Pacific golden chanterelles, it'd be really easy to look at this, Look at that little slug going nuts on this. It'd be easy to look at this and to mistake it for the early little pins of the Pacific golden chanterelle, Cantharellus formosus. We see the slugs taking to it in a similar way to how it takes to the chanterelle growth. But this is not that. This is actually the early fruiting body of the Dyer's Polypore, Phaeolus schweinitzii. This is one that we've talked about in videos past. This is one I'll pop back and give this another look in the weeks ahead to show you what this is going to look like in the not too distant future. And boy, I'm super excited to see what the recent rains have been doing out here in the forest. Take a look at this, just up here, just off to the side of the trail. Look what's catching my eye. Look at that. In amongst the salal leaves, it would be easy to miss this. But take a look. This is a proper flush. Look at these. Pacific golden chanterelles, Cantharellus formosus. These are proper flowers too. We've got a cluster of 3 or 4 of these. And notice, just pushing up through the duff, we can see how this is starting to take on a different characteristic, a different form from some of the other chanterelles that we've been seeing these past several weeks. Notice that we're getting really developed ridges or gill-like structures underneath. This one's got a little mold up top. Notice that it's split a little bit, so we can see it's not like this thing just popped up today. It's been out here a little while, but this moisture is really encouraging some good proper growth. We see those are true chanterelle flowers that are a little bit of a harbinger of what's to come. I have no doubt that we're going to start seeing more and more of these as this moisture and precipitation continues. So fingers crossed here that this is just the start of the rainy season. We'll see what the future brings. And take a look at what's catching my eye just down here. So you can see we've got a proper chanterelle flower here. So this is very, very different than that summer chanterelle morphology that we were seeing. It was more or less these stout, kind of underdeveloped chanterelles. This one, we can see how this is really flowered out. Let me give it a tug here, and we'll see what this is looking like underneath. But I suspect that we're going to see really developed hymenia here. Yeah, look at this. Oops. Let's take a look underneath. Yeah, look at that. So we've got those super developed ridges. And you know, I have no doubt that this thing has been going for quite some time, but a little bit of moisture goes a really long way. So we'll see if this continues here in the days ahead. And so cool to have everything thoroughly moistened up here with the recent rains. Take a look at what's catching my eye right down here. At first glance, it'd be easy to mistake this for a white chanterelle. But take a look as I zoom in. Notice this is super squishy, a little softer to the touch than we would anticipate or expect with white chanterelle. And then of course underneath, you can kind of see that that's, look at that, how my finger leaves an impression there. And as I take a closer look, I see another one down here at the base. So this is our Dyer's Polypore, Phaeolus schweinitzii. So that's going to continue to grow out bigger. But this is surely associated with this Douglas fir here, which is a shame because we can see that this is just a beautiful, well-developed tree out here in the forest. Definitely over 100 years old, probably a couple hundred years old. And again, as I've referenced in videos past, a lot of times when we do see these Dyer's polypores, starting to flush out at the base of these old Doug firs, we know that that's a sign of things to come for that Douglas fir. It's probably not long of this world. Notice too that we've got a pored surface underneath. Let me see if I can zoom in on this to give you a little better look. So this is thought to be parasitic, so working off of the root structure here of this Douglas fir. So it's said that when we see these at the base of these big old Douglas firs, that they're not long of this world, and that it's just a matter of time before we've got enough rot and decay around the base at the root structure of these big trees. They're certainly coming down. So this is not something that I love to see out here in the forest, but it's all part of the sequence, part of the process out here in the forest ecology of the Pacific Northwest. And just up here, off to the side of the trail, we've got a fresh fruiting of one of our favorite medicinal mushrooms, just starting to pop out here. Take a look at this. So we've got one of our absolute favorites. This is the turkey tail, Trametes versicolor. And notice we've got this light colored outer margin, but in the center we've got these banded colors. Now it's worth noting that this cap is going to have a little bit of a velvety feel to it. We refer to that as being tomentose, so a little fuzzy or furry cap. And again, typically we're going to see this growing from hardwoods. Occasionally I'll see it growing from coniferous wood out here, but typically on hardwoods. Most often in my forest, I most often see it on red alder and maple, big leaf maple. But one of the ultimate tests that we can perform to really kind of confirm that we've got true turkey tail here is to peel off one of these mushrooms and to investigate, once we've seen the banded color and the tomentose cap, to look at the undersurface. What we're looking for is a finely poured white surface. The lookalikes will lack that, so the Sterium and Trichaptum genus will look quite a bit different underneath. So this is something that is a relatively easy mushroom to identify. It's one to be on the lookout for. These are, of course, just getting started. I'll zoom in and see if I can highlight those fine white pores. But I think that I'm going to let this continue to fruit out, but I'll certainly be back just in time for cold and flu season. This is one that I can typically find year-round, but fall is prime time for foraging these guys. And just down here, we've got a very welcome sight. Growing from this western hemlock log, we've got last year's growth of the West Coast Reishi, Ganoderma oregonense. So if you've watched the videos for some time, you're no stranger to this one. Looks like it doesn't want to budge. I'm going to leave it right where it is. But you can see it's a little soft to the touch. It's got kind of this callous outer layer that's now blackened with age. But you can see those old kind of growth rings where there was banded colors at one time up on the cap. This would have been a deep red when it was fresh. And these are just starting to fruit out, late summer, early fall. You start to see these and they'll be very colorful, red, orange, yellow, with a white outer margin. A lot of times when I see these, I'll peruse the log or snag that I see them growing from. This could potentially be the nub of a fresh growth of reishi. So this is a spot that I'll definitely check back. And these have a special fondness for western hemlock. So if you're aware of some snags or downed hemlocks in the forest near you, definitely take some time to poke around and see if you see this one. It has a very long history of medicinal use and is one of my absolute favorite mushrooms to track down this time of year. Always a pleasure bumping into the West Coast Reishi. And take a look down here. Boy, this is always a joy. I always have to do a double take when I first identify one of these guys that's popping up through the mosses. Take a look. This is our friend, the white chanterelle, Cantharellus subalbidus. We can see surely this has been out a while. See how it's kind of a little golden there at the fringe or at the margin? Let's take a look underneath. Yeah, look at that. Super well developed ridges underneath. Just oh, look at that. Also our spider friend that I oftentimes see associated with this guy. Really curious to learn more about that particular spider that seems to have such a close relationship to the white chanterelle. But what a beauty, right? This is definitely a chunky mushroom. This is pretty stout, well developed. Lots of flesh there. And again, interesting how these spiders always show up along with this white chanterelle. Certainly an interesting little symbiosis going on there. That's something I need to continue to do more research on. But those two seem to go hand in hand out here in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. And super excited to stumble across one of these bigger white chanterelles. And again, this is certainly not out here alone. So this, our flag for the day, I'll certainly use this as kind of home base for a deeper inspection out here. But just look at those ridges underneath. Isn't that a thing of beauty? I think of that as just being one of the masterpieces of the forest out here. I feel like I could stare at the underside of these white chanterelles all day. Something to really marvel at. And again, as I've been just kind of admiring this particular mushroom and that gill-like structure underneath, as well as where it came from, we can see the base and a little bit of mycelial growth underneath the duff there. But it also gave me pause and made me identify this moss a little more closely. Look at this down here. So I never would have noticed this if not for that other flag. This is something I would have stepped right over, maybe even stepped right on. But look at this. Isn't this amazing? Look at how this is oftentimes held down by this. We can see this branch or twig or root just kind of holding down the fruiting body of this white chanterelle, kind of keeping it confined to underneath the mosses and the duff layer. Let's liberate this guy and take a close look underneath to see what we see underneath here. What a beauty, right? And look at that. Look at that too, where it's already starting to kind of waste away a little bit down there. So certainly not new or fresh growth. This has been fruiting out for quite some time now. And you know, I've been collecting white chanterelles out of this forest for weeks. So these are surely ones that I've probably walked right by, to be honest. And it's not until they get adequate growth that a lot of times they reveal themselves. So, and even once they've revealed themselves, not necessarily breaking fully free of that mossy duff. And take a look at what we've got here. A beautiful black-tailed deer. This is actually a subspecies of the mule deer. I'm always interested to see what these guys are eating out here in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. And this guy looks to be going to work on the leaves of a black cottonwood. So there's actually a limb or I guess several branches or limbs that have fallen off of a black cottonwood. And this guy can't seem to get enough of those cottonwood leaves. Earlier this spring, I bumped into one of these black-tailed deer in a local forest here. And it was interesting because it was springtime and he was eating or stripping leaves off of our native Pacific crabapple tree. I always think it's interesting on a seasonal basis to see exactly what these guys are getting into. You can see that this young buck, he's got a set of antlers that he's working on growing out. Now notice that currently those are covered in velvet, which will eventually be rubbed off or waste away to reveal the classic kind of white antler that we associate with deer. But it's worth noting that, you know, different animals that have horns, those horns are, you know, constructed out of keratin, so similar to our fingernails. Whereas something that differentiates these particular ungulates, deer and elk in particular, is that they've got true antlers, which are constructed of bone. So these antlers are actually going to grow underneath skin, which is the velvet that you're seeing here. So as those antlers grow out, it stretches the skin thinner and thinner. And that's that velvet layer that we see currently on there. So the bone that's growing or developing underneath that is going to become the antlers. And you can see we've got a couple points per antler. Boy, look at his ears going to work here. I always think it's amazing to see on these mule deers, the black-tailed deer here, how effectively it's able to kind of swivel its ears, much like, a satellite or radar dish, to really zero in on sound. Let's pivot around here and see if we can get a closer look. What a beautiful deer, right? And you'll notice, so as we referenced, he's primarily munching on these black cottonwood leaves right now. But it's worth noting that these guys will consume mushrooms as well as lichens and different things. So it's always interesting, because as they're growing out these antlers, they need access to different trace minerals and calcium and different nutrition at different times a year. So it's always interesting to try to get a beat on exactly what's going on. Another interesting little side note about this is that, those antlers, because they consist of bone, contain calcium at a level that is kind of rare out here in the forest. So once they do shed these antlers later in the season, those become a crucial resource for rodents like the Douglas squirrel or mice and different things. So it's kind of rare out here in the forests of the Pacific Northwest to encounter these sheds. We're oftentimes competing with the rodents. So will this prove to be yet another record year when it comes to chanterelles and some of our other favorite fall season mushrooms? Time will only tell. But when I look at the weather forecast these days, I'm seeing quite a bit of rain, some cooler temperatures in store in the not too distant future. So I'll certainly be welcoming the shift and change of the season, and we'll see what it brings in terms of mushrooms. Thanks again for joining me out here on the Mushroom Trail. Hope you enjoyed this episode. And again, if you're liking this content, don't forget, hit the like button, subscribe, stay tuned, maybe even leave a comment. All these actions really help the channel grow and continue to encourage me to bring you great free content in the days to come. Until next time, happy trails.